Welcome to this comprehensive journey through the history of Idaho, one of America's most fascinating yet often overlooked states. Today, we're diving deep into the story of the Gem State, a land of stunning contrasts where towering mountains meet vast plains, where ancient volcanic forces shaped dramatic landscapes, and where Native American heritage blends with pioneer determination to create a unique American story. Idaho might be famous for its potatoes today, but its history is far richer than any agricultural product could suggest. This is a story of indigenous peoples who thrived here for millennia, of fur trappers and mountain men who blazed trails through impossible terrain, of gold rushes that brought fortune seekers from around the world, and of communities that transformed wilderness into one of America's most distinctive states. From the depths of Hell's Canyon, North America's deepest river gorge, to the peaks of the Rocky Mountains, from the moon-like craters of the high desert to the pristine lakes of the Panhandle, Idaho's landscape tells a geological story spanning millions of years. But more importantly, it tells a human story, one of survival, adaptation, conflict, cooperation, and ultimately, the forging of a unique identity in the American West. So, settle in as we explore how Idaho earned its nickname as the Gem State, why it became the last of the contiguous states to be explored by Europeans, and how it transformed from one of America's most remote frontiers into a modern state that balances preservation of its natural wonders with the demands of the 21st century. Chapter 1: The First Peoples, Ancient Idaho. Long before Idaho had a name, before any European foot touched its soil, this land was home to sophisticated indigenous societies. Archaeological evidence suggests human presence in Idaho dating back at least 14,500 years. With the discovery of stone tools and ancient campfire remains at Wilson Butte Cave near Twin Falls. These earliest inhabitants arrived during the last ice age, when massive glaciers covered much of North America. They followed megafauna, mammoth, giant ground sloths, and ancient bison across the Bering Land Bridge and eventually into what would become Idaho. As the climate warmed and the ice retreated, these peoples adapted to changing conditions, developing increasingly sophisticated tools and survival strategies. The tribes of Idaho. By the time of European contact, Idaho was home to 5 major tribal groups, each adapted to their specific regions and maintaining distinct cultures, languages, and traditions. The Shoshone-Bannock peoples dominated southern Idaho, ranging across the Snake River Plain. These were actually two distinct but allied groups: the Shoshone, who spoke a Uto-Aztecan language, and the Bannock, who spoke a dialect of northern Paiute. They were semi-nomadic peoples who followed seasonal patterns, hunting buffalo on the plains, fishing for salmon in the rivers, and gathering camas roots in the mountain valleys. The camas root was so important to their diet that wars were fought over the best gathering grounds. In the north, the Coeur d'Alene people controlled the region around the lake that bears their name. Master traders and skilled canoe builders, they controlled important trade routes between the coast and the interior. Their name, given by French traders, means heart of an awl, supposedly referring to their sharp trading practices. The Nez Perce, perhaps Idaho's most famous tribe, inhabited the Clearwater region and the valleys of north-central Idaho. They called themselves the Nimiapuu, meaning the people, exceptional horsemen who developed the Appaloosa breed, the Nez Perce maintained vast herds and traded horses throughout the Northwest. Their seasonal rounds took them from river valleys, where they fished for salmon, to high meadows, where they hunted and gathered. The Kootenai people lived in the extreme northern panhandle, with most of their territory extending into what is now Canada and Montana. Known for their distinctive sturgeon nose canoes, they were the only plateau tribe to speak a language with no proven relationship to any other. The Northern Paiute controlled portions of southwestern Idaho, particularly the Owyhee region, adapted to the harsh, high desert environment. They were masters of survival in one of North America's most challenging landscapes. A complex society. These tribes weren't isolated groups barely surviving in the wilderness. They maintained extensive trade networks that stretched from the Pacific coast to the Great Plains. Dantalium shells from the coast were traded for buffalo hides from the plains. Obsidian from Idaho's volcanic regions was crafted into tools and weapons that have been found hundreds of miles away. They had sophisticated spiritual beliefs centered on the interconnection of all living things. The Nez Perce concept of the seven drums, representing the heartbeat of Mother Earth, influenced their approach to everything from governance to resource management. The Shoshone Bannocks round dance brought communities together in celebration and spiritual renewal. These societies managed their environments actively. They used controlled burns to maintain meadows for game and to encourage the growth of food plants. They developed sophisticated fishing technologies, including elaborate weirs and traps for catching salmon during the great runs. They created trade languages and sign systems that allowed communication across linguistic barriers. Chapter 2: The Era of Exploration. The arrival of Europeans. Idaho was one of the last regions of what would become the United States to be explored by Europeans. While Spanish conquistadors were marching through the Southwest in the 1500s, and English colonists were establishing themselves on the Atlantic coast in the 1600s, Idaho remained unknown to the European world well into the 1800s. The first Europeans to enter Idaho were members of the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1805, commissioned by President Thomas Jefferson after the Louisiana Purchase. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark were tasked with finding a practical water route to the Pacific Ocean and establishing American presence in the newly acquired territory. Lewis and Clark's Idaho adventure. The expedition entered Idaho on August 12, 1805. Crossing Lemhi Pass from Montana, they were the first American citizens to set foot in Idaho. Though they didn't know they were making history, Idaho wouldn't exist as a concept for another 58 years. Their time in Idaho proved to be some of the most challenging of their entire journey. The Salmon River, which they hoped would provide an easy water route to the Columbia, proved impassable, earning its nickname River of No Return. The expedition nearly starved, crossing the Bitterroot Mountains in September 1805. Snow came early, game was scarce, and the men were reduced to eating candles and horse meat to survive. It was the Nez Perce who saved them. The expedition stumbled out of the mountains near present-day Vape, more dead than alive. The Nez Perce could have easily destroyed the weakened party. Instead, influenced by a woman named Watkowais, who had been treated kindly by white traders, they fed the expedition, helped them recover, and showed them how to build canoes for the final journey to the Pacific. The fur trade era. Lewis and Clark's reports of streams teeming with beaver opened Idaho to the fur trade era. The beaver hat fashion craze in Europe and America drove an international industry that would shape Idaho's early European history. British fur traders from the Northwest Company and later the Hudson's Bay Company approached from the north. American companies, particularly John Jacob Astor's Pacific Fur Company, came from the east. These competing interests would influence Idaho's eventual boundaries and American ownership. The fur traders, or mountain men, as Americans called them, were a unique breed. Men like Jim Bridger, Jedediah Smith, and Peter Skeen Ogden became legends. They lived like the Native Americans, often marrying into tribes, learning languages, and adopting indigenous survival techniques. Their annual rendezvous, huge trading gatherings held in places like Pierre's Hole, now Teton Valley, were combination business meetings, resupply operations, and wild parties that became the stuff of Western legend, missionaries, and wagon trains. As the fur trade declined in the 1840s due to changing fashion and overtrapping, a new wave of Europeans entered Idaho. Missionaries, Henry and Eliza Spaulding, established a mission among the Nez Perce at Lapwai in 1836. Eliza Spaulding and Narcissa Whitman, who established a mission in nearby Washington, were the first European women to cross the Continental Divide. The Spauldings introduced agriculture, operated a printing press, and created the first written form of the Nez Perce language. Their work was controversial. While some Nez Perce embraced Christianity and European agricultural techniques, others saw the missions as threats to traditional ways. The Oregon Trail. The 1840s brought the Great Wagon Migrations. The Oregon Trail, stretching 2,000 miles from Missouri to Oregon, crossed southern Idaho for about 500 miles. Between 1841 and 1869, an estimated 400,000 emigrants passed through Idaho on their way to Oregon and California. For most emigrants, Idaho was simply something to get through. The Snake River Plain was hot, dry, and dusty. The river itself ran through deep canyons, making water access difficult. Crossing points like Three Island Crossing, near present-day Glens Ferry, were dangerous, with swift currents claiming wagons, livestock, and lives. Yet the trail left indelible marks on Idaho. Trading posts sprang up at key points. Fort Hall, established by Nathaniel Wyeth in 1834 and later sold to the Hudson's Bay Company, became a crucial resupply point. Fort Boise, established by the Hudson's Bay Company, served a similar function in western Idaho. The emigrants also left their marks on the landscape. Wagon ruts, still visible today in places, carved deep grooves in the earth. Names and dates carved on register rock and other landmarks created a historical record written in stone. Some emigrants, seeing opportunity in serving other travelers, stayed to establish ferries, trading posts, and the beginnings of permanent settlement. Chapter 3. The Mining Boom, the Discovery that Changed Everything. In August 1860, a prospector named Elias Davidson Pierce led a party of 10 men into the Clearwater River region, defying a treaty that designated the area as Nez Perce land. Pierce, who had been posing as a trader to scout the territory, found gold on Orofino Creek. He tried to keep the discovery quiet, but by 1861, word had leaked out. What followed was a human tsunami. Within months, thousands of prospectors flooded into Nez Perce territory. The town of Pierce City sprang up almost overnight. Then came Orofino, then Elk City, then Florence, where gold was so abundant that miners reportedly picked up nuggets worth hundreds of dollars. The Boise Basin Bonanza. In 1862, a party led by Moses Splawn found gold in the Boise Basin. This discovery triggered the largest gold rush in Idaho history. Idaho City, which sprang up to serve the miners, became the largest city in the Northwest, with a population exceeding that of Portland and Seattle combined. At its peak, an estimated 70,000 people lived in the Boise Basin. The mining camps were rough places. Idaho City had 23 law firms, but only one school. It had dozens of saloons, but only a handful of churches. The cemetery grew faster than any other part of town. Violence, disease, and mining accidents took a heavy toll. Yet these camps also showed remarkable organization. Miners' courts established rules for claims. Vigilance committees maintained rough justice when official law was absent. Silver Valley. While gold drew the first rushes, silver would prove more enduring. In 1884, Noah Kellogg, a down on his luck prospector, discovered what would become the Bunker Hill Mine in what is now known as Silver Valley. Legend says his donkey wandered off and led him to an outcropping of galena, lead ore rich in silver. The Coeur d'Alene mining district would become one of the world's most productive silver, lead, and zinc mining regions. Towns like Wallace, Kellogg, and Mullen grew up to serve the mines. The wealth generated was staggering. By some estimates, over $6 billion worth of metals have been extracted from the region. The social impact of mining transformed Idaho from a remote frontier into a destination. The population exploded from virtually no European inhabitants in 1860 to over 15,000 by 1863. This created immediate conflicts with Native American tribes who saw their lands overrun and their resources depleted. The mining boom also brought diversity. Chinese miners, often working claims abandoned by whites, made up a significant portion of the mining population. By 1870, Chinese residents represented nearly 30% of Idaho's population. They faced severe discrimination, including special taxes and violence. The 1887 massacre of up to 34 Chinese miners at Deep Creek remains one of the darkest chapters in Idaho history. Mining also brought technology and infrastructure. Narrow gauge railroads snaked into mountain valleys, stamp mills and smelters processed ore. Telegraph lines connected remote camps to the outside world. Engineering marvels, like the lengthy flumes that carried water to hydraulic mining operations, demonstrated human ingenuity in extracting wealth from the mountains. Environmental consequences. The mining boom extracted enormous wealth, but at a cost that wouldn't be fully understood for generations. Hydraulic mining washed entire hillsides into streams. Smelter smoke killed vegetation for miles around. Heavy metals contaminated water and soil. Silver Valley became one of the nation's largest Superfund sites, with cleanup costs exceeding $1 billion. Yet mining also drove innovation. Idaho miners and engineers developed new techniques for extracting and processing ore. The need to transport ore led to road and railroad construction that opened the state to further development. Mining taxes funded schools and government services. Chapter 4. The Territorial Years, Creating Idaho Territory. On March 4th, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed the act creating Idaho Territory. The timing was no coincidence. The Civil War was raging, and the Union needed gold to fund the war effort. Creating a territorial government would help maintain order and ensure the gold kept flowing east. The original Idaho Territory was vast, encompassing present-day Idaho, Montana, and most of Wyoming. With about 350,000 square miles, it was larger than Texas. Lewiston, the only incorporated town, became the first territorial capital. The choice of the name Idaho has a curious history. It was claimed to be a Shoshone word meaning gem of the mountains or the sun comes from the mountains. In reality, it was likely invented by George M. Willing, a mining lobbyist who simply made it up. By the time this was discovered, the name had stuck. Territorial politics and border changes. Idaho's territorial period was marked by political chaos and constantly shifting boundaries. The territory was simply too large to govern effectively. In 1864, Montana Territory was carved out, taking the northeastern portion. In 1868, Wyoming Territory was created, taking the southeastern section. This left Idaho with its distinctive panhandle shape, a geographic oddity that would influence its development for generations. The capital moved from Lewiston to Boise in 1865, a shift that caused tremendous controversy. North Idaho residents felt betrayed and began the first of many attempts to join Washington Territory or create their own state. The capital move required territorial officials to transport the territorial seal and archives from Lewiston. Fearing northern residents might block the move, they secretly removed the seal and documents in the middle of the night, an event remembered as the midnight theft of the capital. Law and disorder. Territorial Idaho was a violent place, with thousands of armed men, valuable gold claims, and limited law enforcement. Conflicts were often settled with guns. Vigilance committees dispensed rough justice. In 1864, vigilantes hanged 5 men in Lewiston in one night. Henry Plummer, suspected of leading a gang of road agents while serving as sheriff, was hanged by vigilantes in Montana while his gang operated in Idaho. The territorial government struggled to maintain order. Judges rode circuit, traveling hundreds of miles on horseback to hold court. Many judges didn't last long. The combination of difficult travel, low pay, and occasional death threats drove rapid turnover. Some judges were corrupt, others incompetent. One judge reportedly held court while intoxicated, issuing contradictory rulings in the same case. The Indian Wars. The influx of miners and settlers led to inevitable conflicts with Native American tribes. The Nez Perce, who had been friendly to whites since Lewis and Clark, found their reservation reduced by 90% in an 1863 treaty that many band leaders refused to sign. The Shoshone Bannock faced similar pressures. The Bear River Massacre of 1863, technically in present-day Idaho, though then in Washington Territory, saw U.S. troops kill up to 400 Shoshone, including many women and children. It remains one of the deadliest attacks on Native Americans in U.S. history. The Nez Perce War of 1877 captured national attention. Chief Joseph and other non-treaty Nez Perce, ordered to move to a reservation, instead fled toward Canada. Their 170-mile fighting retreat, during which they defeated or eluded U.S. forces multiple times, became legendary. The war began in Idaho, at Whitebird Canyon, where Nez Perce warriors defeated U.S. cavalry and included battles at the Clearwater and Bear Paw Mountains, building a society. Despite the violence and chaos, territorial residents worked to build civilized society. Schools were established, though finding teachers willing to work in remote mining camps was challenging. Newspapers sprang up. The Idaho Statesman, founded in 1864, continues publishing today. Churches were built, though they competed with saloons for attendance. Women played crucial, but often overlooked roles. Though they couldn't vote, they ran businesses, taught school, and provided medical care. Some became wealthy. Emma Russell Urian owned one of the largest sheep operations in the territory. Others, like Polly Bemis, a Chinese immigrant who became a respected member of the Warren mining community, challenged both racial and gender barriers. The territorial period also saw the beginning of agriculture. Miners needed food, and entrepreneurs discovered that Idaho's volcanic soil, when irrigated, was incredibly productive. Mormon settlers established farming communities in southeastern Idaho. The Boise Valley began its transformation from sagebrush desert to agricultural oasis. Chapter 5: The Path to Statehood. The Long Road. Idaho spent 27 years as a territory, one of the longest territorial periods of any state. Multiple factors delayed statehood. Sparse population, political divisions, economic instability, and national politics all played roles. The population requirement was a persistent problem. Congress generally expected territories to have at least 60,000 residents before statehood. Idaho's population fluctuated with mining booms and busts. The 1870 census showed only 14,999 residents. By 1880, it had grown to just 32,610. Even by 1890, when statehood was achieved, Idaho had only 88,548 residents, still relatively sparse for a state. The Mormon factor. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints played a complex role in Idaho's path to statehood. Mormon settlers established successful agricultural communities in southeastern Idaho starting in the 1860s. By the 1880s, Mormons represented perhaps 25% of Idaho's population. However, the Mormon practice of polygamy created intense controversy. Many non-Mormon Idahoans feared that statehood would lead to Mormon political domination, as had happened in Utah. The Idaho Test Oath, enacted in 1885, disenfranchised anyone who practiced or believed in polygamy, effectively preventing Mormons from voting or holding office. This created a constitutional crisis. The oath was clearly discriminatory, but anti-Mormon sentiment ran high. It wasn't until the LDS Church officially abandoned polygamy in 1890 that this obstacle to statehood was removed. Economic diversification. The 1880s saw Idaho's economy diversify beyond mining. The Oregon Short Line Railroad, completed in 1884, connected Idaho to the Transcontinental Railroad network. This opened eastern markets for Idaho products and brought new settlers. Sheep and cattle ranching expanded across southern Idaho's ranges. By 1890, Idaho had over 2 million sheep. The range wars between sheepmen and cattlemen, while less violent than in some states, still created tension and occasional bloodshed. Timber became increasingly important, especially in northern Idaho. The vast forests of white pine, called white gold, would eventually make Idaho one of the nation's leading timber producers. Agriculture expanded with irrigation. Private canal companies diverted water from the Snake River and its tributaries. The desert bloomed with wheat, potatoes, sugar beets, and orchards. The transformation was remarkable. Land worth $2 an acre as desert became worth $100 an acre when irrigated. The final push. By 1889, momentum for statehood was building. The admission of North and South Dakota, Montana, and Washington that year left Idaho increasingly isolated as a territory. Idaho politicians of both parties united behind the statehood effort. The Idaho Constitutional Convention convened in Boise on July 4th, 1889. The 72 delegates, including lawyers, miners, farmers, and businessmen, crafted a constitution in just 25 days. They borrowed heavily from other state constitutions, but added distinctive Idaho elements, including strong water rights provisions and prohibition of test oaths. Some provisions were progressive for the time. The Constitution mandated free public schools and created a permanent endowment for education. It established an 8-hour workday for government workers and prohibited child labor in mines. Statehood achieved. On July 3rd, 1890, President Benjamin Harrison signed the act admitting Idaho as the 43rd state. The news reached Boise by telegraph, setting off celebrations throughout the state. Cannons fired, bells rang, and impromptu parades filled the streets. George L. Shoup, the last territorial governor, became the first state governor, though he served only a few weeks before the legislature elected him to the U.S. Senate. The transition from territory to state was remarkably smooth. Though regional tensions persisted, North Idaho still grumbled about Boise's dominance, and some counties threatened to secede to Washington. Chapter 6: Early Statehood. The Progressive Era in Idaho entered the Union during America's Progressive Era, and the state became a laboratory for political reform. In 1896, Idaho gave its electoral votes to William Jennings Bryan, embracing his populist message. The state passed progressive legislation, including direct primary elections, the initiative and referendum, and workers' compensation. Women's suffrage became a defining issue. Idaho women gained the right to vote in 1896, making Idaho the fourth state to grant unrestricted women's suffrage. The campaign succeeded through an unlikely coalition of Mormons, populists, and labor unions. Opponents predicted social chaos, but Idaho women voted in similar patterns to men, disappointing both hopes and fears. Labor wars. The 1890s brought violent labor conflicts to Idaho's mining districts. The Western Federation of Miners, founded in Butte in 1893, organized Idaho miners to fight for better wages and working conditions. Mine owners responded by forming their own associations and hiring private security forces. The Coeur d'Alene labor wars of 1892 and 1899 shocked the nation. In 1892, striking miners dynamited the Frisco mill, leading to martial law and federal intervention. In 1899, miners blew up the Bunker Hill concentrator, causing $250,000 in damage. Governor Frank Steunenberg requested federal troops, who rounded up hundreds of miners and held them in crude stockades called bullpens. The aftermath was even more shocking. In 1905, former Governor Steunenberg was killed by a bomb at his home in Caldwell. The investigation led to the arrest of Western Federation of Miners leaders, including Big Bill Haywood. The subsequent trial, featuring Clarence Darrow for the defense and William Borah for the prosecution, became one of the most famous legal proceedings of the era. The acquittal of Haywood and others didn't end the tensions, but it marked a turning point toward less violent labor relations. Irrigation and reclamation. Water transformed Idaho more than any other factor. The 1894 Carey Act allowed states to reclaim federal desert lands through irrigation. Idaho embraced this opportunity enthusiastically, eventually reclaiming more land under the Carey Act than all other states combined. The 1902 Reclamation Act brought federal resources to irrigation development. The Minidoka Project, begun in 1904, was one of the first federal reclamation projects. It transformed the Snake River Plain, creating productive farmland and new communities like Rupert and Paul. The Arrow Rock Dam, completed in 1915 on the Boise River, was the highest dam in the world at 349 feet. It provided irrigation water and flood control for the Boise Valley, enabling intensive agriculture and urban growth. These projects weren't without controversy. They displaced Native Americans, altered ecosystems, and created bitter water rights disputes that persist today. The timber boom northern Idaho's timber industry exploded in the early 1900s. Frederick Weyerhaeuser purchased 100,000 acres of timberland in 1900, beginning industrial-scale logging. The Milwaukee Road and other railroads extended branches into timber country, making large-scale harvest economically feasible. Lumber towns like Potlatch, Headquarters, and Beauville sprang up almost overnight. These company towns were self-contained communities where the timber company owned everything: houses, stores, schools, even churches. Life revolved around the mill whistle, which summoned workers, marked meal times, and announced emergencies. The 1910 Big Burn, also called the Big Blowup, devastated 3 million acres across Idaho, Montana, and Washington. In Idaho alone, 78 firefighters died and entire towns were destroyed. The fire led to major changes in forest management and fire suppression policy that influence forestry practices today. World War I and its aftermath. World War I brought prosperity to Idaho. Demand for minerals, timber, and agricultural products soared. Idaho, farmers planted wheat on every available acre. The state's silver, lead, and zinc mines operated at capacity. Lumber production reached record levels. Idaho contributed enthusiastically to the war effort. The state exceeded every Liberty Bond quota. Idaho had one of the highest per capita enlistment rates. The Idaho 91st Division saw heavy combat in France, suffering significant casualties in the Meuse-Argonne offensive. The war's end brought economic collapse. Agricultural prices plummeted as European production resumed. Mines closed as demand for war materials ended. Returning veterans found few jobs. The 1920s, prosperous for much of America, were difficult years for Idaho. Farm foreclosures soared. Banks failed. Young people left for opportunities elsewhere. Chapter 7: Depression and War. The Great Depression hits Idaho. Idaho was already struggling when the stock market crashed in 1929, making the Great Depression's impact particularly severe. By 1932, farm income had fallen 65% from 1929 levels. Half of Idaho's banks failed. Unemployment in mining districts reached 75%. Lumber mills closed, leaving entire towns without work. The human toll was staggering. Families lost farms that had been homesteaded by grandparents. Children dropped out of school to work. Malnutrition became common. In Silver Valley, unemployed miners survived by hunting, fishing, and gathering. Some families lived in abandoned mine shafts. Yet Idahoans showed remarkable resilience. Communities organized to help the neediest. Churches and civic groups ran soup kitchens. Neighbors shared what little they had. The Mormon Church's welfare program, developed partly in response to Idaho's needs, became a model for self-help organizations. The New Deal in Idaho, Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, brought unprecedented federal involvement in Idaho. The Civilian Conservation Corps established 37 camps in Idaho, employing young men in forest improvement, fire suppression, and construction projects. They built trails, campgrounds, and fire lookouts still used today. The Works Progress Administration employed thousands of Idahoans. WPA workers built schools, courthouses, and community centers. They constructed airports, improved roads, and developed parks. The WPA's Federal Writers Project produced the Idaho Guide, documenting the state's history and culture. Rural electrification transformed farm life. In 1935, only 18% of Idaho farms had electricity. By 1950, over 90% were electrified. Electric lights, refrigeration, and powered equipment revolutionized rural living and agricultural production. The most controversial New Deal program was the Resettlement Administration's attempt to relocate struggling farmers to irrigation projects. The Farm Security Administration photographed Idaho's rural poverty, creating iconic images that shaped national perception of the Depression. World War II transforms Idaho. World War II pulled Idaho out of the Depression and transformed the state. Military installations brought thousands of personnel and federal dollars. Gowan Field, near Boise, became a major training base for bomber crews. The Pocatello Army Air Base trained B-24 Liberator crews. Farragut Naval Training Station on Lake Pend Oreille became the world's second largest naval training center, processing 293,000 sailors. Idaho's strategic minerals were crucial to the war effort. The Sunshine Mine produced silver for electrical equipment. Phosphate mines supplied fertilizer for increased food production. The Idaho National Engineering Laboratory, established in 1949, but with roots in wartime nuclear research, would make Idaho a center of nuclear energy development. The internment camp, one of the war's darkest chapters, played out at Minidoka, where 13,000 Japanese Americans were imprisoned. Most were American citizens from Washington, Oregon, and Alaska, torn from their homes and businesses solely because of their ancestry. Despite their unjust treatment, Minidoka internees showed remarkable patriotism. They formed one of the most decorated military units in U.S. history, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. They maintained schools, grew food, and created a functioning community behind barbed wire. The camp's legacy remains controversial. Some Idahoans opposed the internment and helped internees. Others supported it or profited from abandoned Japanese American property. The Minidoka National Historic Site now preserves this history as a reminder of civil liberties' fragility. Post-war growth. The war's end brought challenges and opportunities. Returning veterans used GI Bill benefits to attend college and buy homes. Boise Junior College became Boise State College, partly to accommodate veteran enrollment. Defense spending continued during the Cold War. Mountain Home Air Force Base, established in 1942, became a permanent Strategic Air Command installation. The National Reactor Testing Station, later Idaho National Laboratory, made Idaho a center of nuclear research. Agriculture modernized rapidly. Mechanization reduced labor needs, while increasing production. Irrigation expanded through deep well pumping and new storage projects. Food processing plants multiplied, adding value to raw agricultural products. The J.R. Simplot Company developed frozen French fries, eventually becoming McDonald's primary supplier. Chapter 8. Modern Idaho emerges economic transformation. The 1960s through 1980s saw Idaho's economy diversify beyond traditional extractive industries. Technology companies discovered Idaho's advantages: low costs, quality of life, and pro-business climate. Hewlett-Packard established a presence in Boise in 1973. Micron Technology, founded in Boise's basement in 1978, became a global semiconductor leader. Tourism emerged as a major industry. Sun Valley, developed by Union Pacific Railroad chairman Averell Harriman in 1936, attracted Hollywood celebrities and wealthy tourists. The 1960s skiing boom brought development to other Idaho mountains. River running, hunting, fishing, and camping drew outdoor enthusiasts from around the world. Environmental awareness grew, sometimes conflicting with traditional industries. The proposed Hells Canyon High Dam, which would have flooded North America's deepest gorge, was defeated by environmental opposition in 1975. The Endangered Species Act listing of salmon affected logging, dam operations, and agriculture. Political evolution. Idaho's political landscape shifted dramatically. Once a swing state that supported Democrats and Republicans equally, Idaho became increasingly conservative. The last Democratic presidential candidate to win Idaho was Lyndon Johnson in 1964. The legislature, once competitive, became overwhelmingly Republican. This shift reflected changing demographics and values. Rural counties, traditionally Democratic, turned Republican as environmental regulations affected logging and mining. Suburban growth around Boise brought conservative voters from California and other states. The Mormon population, increasingly Republican nationally, influenced southeastern Idaho politics. Yet Idaho produced notable political figures across the spectrum. Frank Church served 24 years in the U.S. Senate, chairing the Foreign Relations Committee and investigating CIA abuses. Cecil Andrus served as both governor and U.S. Secretary of Interior, championing wilderness preservation while supporting responsible development. The Aryan Nations era, from the 1970s through 2000, northern Idaho gained unwanted notoriety as headquarters for the Aryan Nations, a white supremacist organization. Richard Butler established a compound near Hayden Lake, attracting neo-Nazis and white nationalists from across the country. Most Idahoans rejected these extremists. The Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations, formed in 1981, organized opposition. Religious leaders, business owners, and ordinary citizens stood against hate. A successful lawsuit by the Southern Poverty Law Center, stemming from an assault on Victoria and Jason Keenan, bankrupted the Aryan Nations in 2000. The compound was destroyed in 2001, but the damage to Idaho's reputation lingered. Northern Idaho worked hard to overcome this association, emphasizing its natural beauty, recreational opportunities, and welcoming communities. Water wars and growth pressures. Water, always precious in Idaho, became increasingly contentious. The Snake River Basin adjudication, begun in 1987, attempted to quantify and prioritize water rights. It became the largest and most complex water rights case in U.S. history, involving 150,000 claims. Endangered salmon, complicated water management. 4 lower Snake River dams faced calls for removal to aid salmon recovery. Farmers feared losing irrigation water. Cities worried about growth limitations. Tribes demanded treaty rights recognition. These conflicts remain unresolved, shaping Idaho's future. Urban growth, particularly in the Treasure Valley. Boise metropolitan area, strained infrastructure, and changed community character. Boise transformed from a small capital city to a metropolitan area, approaching 800,000 people. This growth brought economic opportunity, but also traffic congestion, air quality concerns, and housing affordability challenges. Into the 21st century, the new millennium brought continued change. The technology sector expanded beyond semiconductors to include software, aerospace, and advanced manufacturing. Boise emerged as a startup hub, attracting entrepreneurs and venture capital. Agriculture evolved with technology. Precision agriculture, using GPS and data analytics, maximized yields while minimizing environmental impact. Organic farming expanded to meet consumer demand. Wine grapes joined potatoes and wheat as significant crops. Renewable energy development accelerated. Wind farms sprouted on southern Idaho ridges. Solar installations multiplied. Idaho's abundant hydropower positioned the state as a clean energy leader. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated existing trends. Remote workers, freed from office requirements, moved to Idaho, seeking space, outdoor recreation, and lower costs. This influx drove housing prices to record levels and strained community services, but also brought economic vitality. Chapter 9: Contemporary Challenges and Opportunities. The new Western migration Idaho is experiencing the fastest population growth in its history. The 2020 census showed a 17% increase from 2010, making Idaho the second fastest growing state. This growth isn't evenly distributed. The Treasure Valley absorbs most newcomers, while rural counties struggle with population decline. This migration brings benefits and challenges. New residents bring skills, investment, and economic dynamism. They start businesses, fill labor shortages, and contribute to cultural vitality. But rapid growth strains infrastructure, drives up housing costs, and changes community character. Longtime residents worry about losing Idaho's identity. The housing crisis exemplifies these tensions. Home prices doubled in many markets between 2020 and 2024. Young Idahoans can't afford homes in communities where their families lived for generations. Teachers, firefighters, and other essential workers are priced out. Some communities explore solutions like deed restrictions and affordable housing requirements, but resistance to regulation runs deep. Education at a crossroads. Idaho's education system faces critical challenges. The state consistently ranks near the bottom in per pupil spending and teacher pay. Teacher shortages force districts to hire uncertified instructors and increase class sizes. Rural districts struggle particularly, unable to offer advanced courses or retain qualified teachers. Higher education confronts its own challenges. Idaho has the lowest college enrollment rate in the nation. Brain drain sees talented young Idahoans leave for education and careers elsewhere. Efforts to improve, including the Launch Scholarship Program and community college expansions, show promise but require sustained investment. Yet innovation emerges from adversity. Online learning expands rural access. Dual credit programs let high school students earn college credits. Career technical education aligns training with workforce needs. Industry partnerships provide equipment and expertise. Environmental stewardship. Climate change affects Idaho profoundly. Reduced snowpack threatens water supplies. Earlier runoff challenges irrigation timing. Warmer temperatures enable bark beetle infestations that devastate forests. Wildfire seasons grow longer and more intense, threatening communities and degrading air quality. Conservation efforts show mixed results. Idaho protects vast wilderness areas. The Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness is the largest in the lower 48 states, but endangered species recovery remains contentious. Sage grouse conservation affects ranching. Wolf reintroduction divides communities. Salmon recovery influences every aspect of water management. Public lands management generates perpetual conflict. Idaho is 62% federally owned, creating tensions over local control. Some advocate for state takeover of federal lands. Others value federal management and public access. Collaboration emerges slowly, with groups like the Owyhee Initiative finding compromise between conservation and traditional uses. Economic diversification and innovation. Idaho's economy continues evolving beyond traditional industries. The technology sector now employs tens of thousands. Financial services companies establish operations centers. Advanced manufacturing produces everything from semiconductors to recreational vehicles. Agriculture remains vital, but changes rapidly. Corporate farming increases while family farms decline. Hemp cultivation, illegal for decades, offers new opportunities. Agritourism connects urban consumers with rural producers. Value added processing captures more profit within Idaho. Renewable energy development accelerates but faces opposition. Wind projects encounter resistance over visual impacts and wildlife concerns. Solar farms compete with agriculture for land. Hydropower, Idaho's clean energy backbone, faces pressure from salmon recovery efforts. The outdoor recreation economy emerges as a major force. Recreation contributes billions to Idaho's economy and creates thousands of jobs. But increased visitation stresses popular destinations. User conflicts multiply between motorized and non motorized recreation, hunters and wildlife watchers, locals and tourists. Looking forward, Idaho's future. Idaho stands at a pivotal moment. Growth brings opportunity, but threatens the qualities that make Idaho special. Technology enables economic diversification, but may widen rural urban divides. Environmental challenges demand action, but solutions prove elusive. The state's future depends on balancing competing values, growth and preservation, tradition and innovation, local control and collective action. Success requires acknowledging that Idaho has always been diverse in geography, economy, and people. The myth of a monolithic Idaho never matched reality. Infrastructure investment becomes critical. Roads, bridges, water systems, and broadband need massive upgrades. School facilities require modernization. Housing supply must increase while preserving community character. These investments require resources and political will often in short supply. Workforce development emerges as essential. Idaho needs skilled workers for evolving industries. This requires educational investment from pre-K through graduate programs. It means attracting and retaining talent. It demands creating opportunities that keep young Idahoans home. Conclusion. The Gem State's enduring legacy. As we conclude this journey through Idaho's history, we see a state shaped by extremes and contradictions. Idaho contains some of America's last wilderness and fastest growing cities. It harbors libertarian individualists and communitarian Mormons. It produces potatoes and semiconductors, timber and software, beef and wine. These contradictions aren't weaknesses, but strengths. Idaho's diversity, geographic, economic, and cultural, provides resilience. When mining busts, agriculture sustains. When farming struggles, technology thrives. When old industries decline, new ones emerge. The constant throughout Idaho's history is adaptation. Native peoples adapted to changing climates. Fur traders adapted to international markets. Miners adapted to geology. Farmers adapted desert to productivity. Each generation faced challenges and found solutions. Today's Idahoans inherit this legacy of adaptation. Climate change, population growth, economic transformation, and social change present unprecedented challenges. But Idaho's history suggests its people will adapt, innovate, and persevere. The qualities that defined Idaho's past, independence, resilience, innovation, and community, remain vital. The pioneer spirit lives in entrepreneurs starting businesses. The conservation ethic persists in those protecting wild places. The agricultural tradition continues in farmers feeding the world. The mining heritage endures in those extracting value from difficult places. Idaho's story isn't finished. Each generation writes new chapters. Today's challenges, affordable housing, quality education, environmental protection, economic opportunity, will define tomorrow's history. The choices made now determine whether Idaho remains a place of opportunity and beauty for future generations. The gem state earned its nickname not for actual gems, but for its diverse treasures, stunning landscapes, abundant resources, and resilient people. These treasures remain, though they require careful stewardship. Idaho's history teaches that prosperity comes from using resources wisely, not exhaustively. As Idaho moves forward, it carries lessons from its past. From native peoples, the importance of living sustainably with the land. From pioneers, the value of perseverance through hardship. From miners, the costs of boom and bust economies. From farmers, the miracle of making deserts bloom. From all, the necessity of community in harsh environments. Idaho's future will be different from its past, but certain themes endure. The land will continue shaping those who live on it. Communities will continue balancing independence with interdependence. People will continue seeking opportunity and freedom in Idaho's vast spaces. This has been Idaho's story, from ancient peoples to modern state, from untouched wilderness to thriving cities, from territorial backwater to dynamic state. It's a story of transformation and continuity, conflict and cooperation, hardship and triumph. Idaho remains what it has always been, a place of extremes and opportunities, challenges and rewards, beauty and hardship. Its history provides not just stories of the past, but guidance for the future. In understanding where Idaho has been, we better understand where it might go. The gem state's greatest treasure has always been its people, those who came before, those here now, and those yet to come. Their stories, struggles, and successes create Idaho's true history. That history continues being written every day by every Idahoan, adding new facets to the gem that is Idaho. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Idaho's remarkable history. From the ancient peoples who first called this land home to the diverse communities that thrive here today, Idaho's story is one of continuous transformation, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. The gem state's history isn't just about the past, it's a living narrative that continues to shape its future.